We made it. All right.
All right. Are we waiting for any more, Rob, or will we get started?
People might trickle in. I'm expecting around, well, we had around 75 people sign up. So hopefully people will continue to trickle in.
Sure.
Sonia, maybe have a look at your speaker settings. I think the rest of us are hearing Julian just fine. But I'll give you a quick introduction, Julian. Julian is one of our entrepreneurs in residence at the OU, who started with us last year, but obviously has been running his own businesses for a number of years now, primarily teaching entrepreneurial skills to young people. But Julian's got a great way of presenting business ideas, presenting topics in entrepreneurship, and I asked him if he would give us a rundown today on pitching. Pitching is an unavoidable part of any entrepreneur's journey, and loads of people feel uncomfortable with it, but I think that's natural. So, Julian, take it away.
Thank you, Rob. Just to check, can you see my camera, or is it just the screen you can see?
Just the screen.
That's fine. That's fine. No problem at all. Well, welcome everybody, and I am super excited to be here together with you today, because pitching, as Rob says, is one of those things in business and probably in life that we'll all have to get used to in some format. So I'm really glad to share my experience with you. I'm going to run through a presentation which should take around 20 minutes or so, which will hopefully leave us with some time for questions. Rob, are you happy to pick up the questions in the chat as they come in?
Absolutely.
Wonderful. Thank you, Rob. So just to give you a brief history about me. So my name is Julian.Hall. I'm the CEO and founder of a now 9-year-old social enterprise called Ultra Education. And we teach entrepreneurship to kids from 7 years old. And that's what I do pretty much full time. So there's a picture with me and my son. That was at our 2016 Kids Business Fair at Here East, where we had about 45 kid entrepreneurs. The last one we ran was on Piccadilly next to Fortnum and Mason last year, and we had about 150 kid entrepreneurs between 7 and 18 exhibiting their bits and pieces. We've got a picture there on the top left of an award-winning author called Tegan Helen, and her brother next to her, Tyler David, who between them, believe it or not, have written 50 books on stories, on the power of the mind, on saving money and all sorts. So we've got a really vibrant community, which we're really proud of. I've done a few other things. There's a game you'll see there in the top middle circle called Startup Dash, which is like an endless runner game, which teaches young kids about the basics around entrepreneurship. Top right, we developed a tech arm to our business, which created a chatbot which could teach entrepreneurship autonomously. I'm the writer of a number of books on business and entrepreneurship, many of which have hit the bestsellers list, which I'm really proud of. Right there in the middle, one of our young entrepreneurs won Young Mentee of the Year a couple of years back. I'm also on the board of a number of organizations. One of them is the Shakespeare Globe, which I'm really proud to be. Bottom left there is just gives you a sense of some of the places I've been featured in, so the FT and a number of other media publications. I've spoken on the topic of innovation and entrepreneurship in about 15 different countries across the world, and I am a proud, newly invited entrepreneur in residence at the Open University. So that's just a little bit about me. So, I mean—
Hey, Julian?
Yes.
Before we move on, we have some people saying they cannot see. Oh, they can see now. I was going to see if I might try sharing your slides.
Do you want to do that? Shall we do that instead?
Yeah, let me give it a try. Just
as
the meeting owner, it might work for me better.
Yeah, certainly.
Don't mean to cut you off mid-pitch.
No worries at all.
All right, and All right, can everybody see this?
Yeah, seems to be good, Rob.
All right, and now I'm seeing you. So where do I go to?
Yeah, just click on, there should be a present. Oh, the bottom right, there's a full screen button. 2 arrows, that one, yeah. Okay, cool.
All right, and you're on
All right.
this gift
I am.
here.
Right, so you might be wondering, who's this guy talking to you about raising money? What have I done? So just to kind of qualify some of my experience, and really just to lend it actually, in all the different formats that I've pitched and raised money. So the first time I raised money was back in 2006. And I pitched to raise some money for my digital agency, which was my first proper business back then in Shoreditch. And we raised over 6 figures to get that business off the ground. And that gave me the first experience really of pitching something meaningful and having a successful outcome from it. I've pitched to multiple stakeholders, whether they have been investors, whether they've been stakeholders, grant makers, foundations, angels, venture capital firms. You know, I've probably pitched to everyone you can imagine. And I've learned quite a lot, which I'm hoping to share with you here. And in just the last 2 years, probably, maybe 2.5, all of the pitching that I've done has enabled me to raise close to £1 million in various instances over a couple of projects and organizations. So I've got a lot of experience of this stuff, and I've got the scars to prove it. I won't show you, but hopefully I can share some of those learnings with you today. Rob, if you move on. So you'll be familiar with pitching in a number of different scenarios. And one of the scenarios we're used to seeing people pitch are in startup environments where entrepreneurs are pitching for funding. Maybe we've seen Dragon's Den or Shark Tank. And so I think actually there are other ways in which you will be pitching your ideas, your businesses, and they can form different scenarios. So for example, a really popular pitch is what they've called an elevator pitch. So the idea is that you go into a building, big shiny building, and you meet whoever it is your star investor, right? You might bump into Richard Branson, you might bump into one of the dragons from Dragon's Den, someone from Shark Tank, a celebrity maybe, and you're working on a business and you're going up in the elevator to the top floor, and you've got pretty much like 20 or 30 seconds to give them an elevator pitch. And this scenario probably conjured up decades ago to represent the idea that actually, in order to get the interest of somebody who might invest in your business, these individuals are usually quite busy, they're time poor, and they are always being pitched ideas left, right, and center. And usually they can tell within a very short space of time. I mean, we're talking, 30 seconds to 1 minute, based on what you deliver, whether or not they would be interested. And the idea of this elevator pitch is that by the time you get up to the top floor, to their penthouse office or whatever it might be, that you've interested them enough for them to invite you to give them a proper presentation, a little bit like the one we're seeing on the screen. Now, the challenge with an elevator pitch is that it forces you to be really concise and really pointed with the message that you're trying to get across. And it's a type of pitch that I would encourage you all to learn a bit more about. I'll go into a bit more of the detail around it in a few slides. But normally when we talk about a pitch and a presentation, we think about something which might last 20 minutes or whatever it might be. But actually a lot of that now is narrowed down. And 2 of the probably more common pitches you'll be exercising in your lives as entrepreneurs or professionals will be that elevator pitch. And it's talked about in an elevator scenario, but it could be that you're out to lunch with someone, or you bump into someone, you know, on your way to uni or on your way to work. You might see them at a bar. It might just be any other scenario where there are time constraints and you don't have your shiny pitch deck, you don't have all of your presentation tools with you, but you've got to be able to capture the imagination of that individual in front of you. So there's that elevator pitch. And then there's the well-worn kind of Dragon's Den, Shark Tank pitch, which we're more familiar with. And those do take different formats. Sometimes you'll have, you know, 10 minutes, sometimes 20 if you're lucky. But over the last perhaps decade, that's come down quite a bit. And often, particularly, well, especially when I've been pitching over the last 5 years, I mean, I've been given like 2 to 3 minutes to be able to do this kind of stuff. So I'm saying all of that to say that when you're thinking about pitching, there are different formats, different scenarios that you need to kind of get used to when you're thinking about pitching. So some of this is an overview that you can go into a bit more detail as you kind of learn more about what you want to pitch and who you want to pitch it to. Okay, good. So, yeah, Rob, if you want to move on. So, much like many terms in business, the idea of pitching came from sports, right? And you've got the pitcher there throwing the baseball, and he's doing something quite deliberate. There's a lot of energy that goes behind it. There's a lot of focus that goes behind it, a lot of practice. When you see someone in a sporting scenario like our pitcher here, a lot has gone behind it. So by the time that ball has been thrown, there's been a lot of thinking, there's been a lot of planning, there's been a lot of direction and focus that's gone behind that pitch. And it's the same thing that you will be doing when you pitch. It's not something that you will do off the cuff. It's something that you will practice. It's something that you will learn to do. It's something that you will focus on a particular area, whether it's the area of your business or who you're pitching to. So I use this analogy just to share that pitching isn't something that you can just kind of roll out of bed and do. No, actually, there's a lot of practice that it takes. And if you've seen someone pitch really well and they've made it look easy, that's because they've put a lot of hard work and a lot of time behind it. But also pitching, you know, it's a high stakes game. Just like in a sporting scenario, this pitcher is trying to catch the batter out. And so there are stakes behind it. Similarly with your pitch, the way you look at it is that you have a moment in time to try and capture the interest of whomever it is you are pitching to. Again, whether it's you're pitching yourself in an interview scenario, you're pitching to raise money for a business, you know, whatever the scenario is, usually you will not get that time back. Usually it's usually a one-time thing. There are no do-overs. You can't hit the rewind button. So I'm saying all of that to say that the preparation that you put in front of that pitch is meaningful, and it shouldn't be understated. And again, stating the obvious, but it is worth stating, as with most things in life, the more effort you put into something, the more you get out of it. So in my experience of pitching, because I know that I'm not going to be able to repeat that opportunity again, I really do set the time aside to prepare myself in all the facets that I think are going to be useful for me on the day, so that I can really, you know, bring my A game to that scenario. So one of the things that I did want to mention is when you are thinking about delivering your idea to people, particularly if it is a startup idea, in the last 5 or 10 years, one of the questions that you will get after the moment they ask you, what is your business idea? So somebody might say, you might bump into someone, an investor, you know, another entrepreneur, a partner, stakeholder, whatever it might be. And they'll ask you, you know, you've got an idea for a business, what's your idea? And you'll give them the idea. And then often what people in the startup ecosystem will then ask, or investors, or people who are a bit more switched on, they'll then ask you, what problem are you trying to solve? And this is a very, very common question, which is almost like a very close secondary question when it comes to that elevator pitch. And it's something that you need to be able to articulate in a very, very short space of time. When you are asked, what is your business idea? You should be able to deliver that in 1 or 2 sentences. And if the person listening gets what you're trying to do, they've received that initial pitch in that 1 or 2 lines, they then might ask, what problem are you trying to solve? And again, you should be able to do this in ideally 1 sentence. And then the third question, which they might follow up with, if they've been if they're quite experienced at this line of questioning, is then asking you, who are you solving the problem for, right? Now, a number of these questions and scenarios that I'm just presenting to you loosely can be represented in a business plan, they can be represented in a pitch deck, but you might be asked them in different formats. And usually it's because whoever it is you're speaking to, if they do have the ability to invest, they want to feel like you really understand the business. So it's not just a rehearsed pitch that you're regurgitating for the sake of that 5 or 10 minutes that you have with them, that you actually have a really good understanding of what it is you're talking about, because that will come across whilst you're delivering your pitch. A bit like our picture here, the batter will be able to tell whether or not he's taken time to practice that throw by the way in which the batter has received it. In the same way, whoever it is you're talking to will know how much time you've spent, how much thought and preparation you've put behind that 1 sentence or that 1 answer, and that will be meaningful to how they receive that pitch. Thanks, Rob. Let's move on. So one of the things which, when you're pitching, is a really common problem, is to complicate things and to make your pitch look like the equation on that screen. Now, I mean, maybe we have someone here who's studying maths or physics even, but I can't tell what's on that screen. I can't make it out. And it's a silly analogy, but often if you are pitching a business that is in a niche, that has some kind of specialist knowledge behind it, or that you have a unique experience that you're bringing to this that is clouded in industry speak or very niche sector terms, then you need to get rid of all of that. Because what will happen is when you are delivering your pitch, you may deliver it with what people refer to as assumed knowledge. So you would assume that everybody knows what you're talking about, and perhaps in the 10 or 15 minutes that I've been speaking to you, I may have used some assumed knowledge or some assumed terms that you might pick up on later on in the questions. But in your preparation, you want to think to yourself, whoever it is I'm speaking to, they know absolutely nothing about my industry, my sector, my business. They know nothing. And you've got to use that as a starting point so that you can craft the narrative behind your pitch in such a way that a 10-year-old could understand it. And ironically, we're running a project in about 3 weeks' time in Liverpool with some startup founders and some investors. Actually, we're the founders, the startup entrepreneurs will be pitching their ideas to 10 and 11-year-olds alongside real investors. So they'll really be put to task as to whether or not they can simplify the language. So, for example, I run an education business, and I could quite easily start talking about pedagogies and schemes of work, lesson plans, learning outcomes. I could talk about different learning styles and outcome measures, Rosenberg self-esteem principles and logic models. And I could go on for days and days and days if I'm raising money for my business, using a lot of terms which in my industry people would be really familiar with. But if I'm speaking to someone who is from another industry who is going to invest, I've got to use layman's terms or language which they can understand. Now, you might think to yourself, well, if someone doesn't understand what I'm saying, surely they'll ask. Well, nobody wants to look stupid in a room. So often people don't ask. So number one, people often don't ask because they don't want to look silly. And that's even if you are a seasoned investor, right? You may not want to ask. And number two, people don't want to ask because they'll see that as a red flag. They'll see the fact that you're using all these complicated terms and industry inside knowledge, and that you don't realize that the average person, or you don't understand your audience, right? So they'll see that as a red flag, and they'll let you rock on. Often people just sometimes don't have the time to feedback, or they just don't feedback because they're just too busy because they've got another entrepreneur to see. So again, it's something I see all the time. It's really, really common. So whenever you're thinking about your pitch, do your best to remove any assumed knowledge or industry-specific terminology, so that, remember this, your pitch can be understood by a 10-year-old. Thanks, Rob. We'll move on. So I remember about 10 years ago now, when I was asked to go and speak at a careers event to some sixth formers at a school in North London. And I was the entrepreneur who was there to, talk to them about entrepreneurship. But before me, there were people from high street banks, solicitors, architects, law firms, blah, 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 all the usual. And I remember there was somebody who came up from the bank. I'm not going to say who the bank was. And they loaded and I kid you not, they loaded a 50-slide presentation to present to these sixth formers. And I mean, death by PowerPoint could never be a truer statement. But not only did they load a 50-slide presentation to deliver to these sixth formers, I mean, even the teachers were on their phones at this point. Not knowing your audience, they very early on in their presentation made a reference to Dick Whittington and how Dick Whittington was brave enough to leave where he was to go into the City of London. And I just sat there and thought, the sixth formers, they don't know who Dick Whittington is. Right? It was a useful reference if you knew who this character was, but it was just so far off the mark that I always remembered. I mean, you saw when the PowerPoint loaded and it kind of looked a little bit like this. But I'm saying that to say that because you're probably really passionate about your idea, you probably want to tell everyone everything there is to know, because if they don't, they're just not going to understand it. And you will quite easily fall into the trap of producing more slides, more information than you need, right? And what you have to appreciate is that in the pitch, whether it's the elevator pitch or the 5-minute pitch or 20-minute pitch that you get, that is an introduction to your idea. That is not, it's not Dragon's Den or Shark Tank. You are unlikely to receive funding off the back of that initial pitch. That initial pitch is acting as a filter, is acting as an introduction, usually, so that when you get past that point, then you can, assume death by PowerPoint to whomever it is, because at that point they're now going to potentially part with cash. So they're going to want to do some due diligence. They're going to want to understand a lot more about what it is you're doing. But during the course of the pitch, you've got to keep it concise. And what I would do is I would perhaps start with 100 slides and then really whittle it down to the number of slides that you will actually need in a pitching environment. And I'll go back to it. Usually, if you are going into a pitch competition, then it's quite common for you to only have a few minutes to pitch. So you physically won't be able to give them, the Encyclopedia Britannica, right, version. And there's my old man reference for you, or your Wikipedia version of your business. You're going to have to really, really crunch it down, which I've done on the next slide. So Rob, if you go across to the next slide. This is a business which I successfully pitched and raised. Oh, no, sorry, this is another one. So this is a business that I've been currently pitching. So it's, we run, as I mentioned to you earlier on, a social enterprise which teaches entrepreneurship to kids. One of the problems that kids have is selling their products and finding somewhere which is focused on young people. So we've been playing around with an idea for a youth business platforms like Amazon, but for kids' businesses, is my one-liner for it. And this is the pitch deck that we've put together, that we've been going out and kind of pitching. So I'm just going to take you through the slides. Now, even this is a lot of slides. Even this is a lot of slides. If I was, this is what I would send to an investor. This isn't what I would necessarily use to pitch per se. So I'll just start so you can get a sense of it. So we've got the first slide, which is just the cover slide. So that's the slide that you would usually just have up as it almost doesn't count, right? If you're in a pitching scenario and your slides are being loaded, that's just really the cover slide. The mission slide that we've got here is the one-liner for me. So that's when I said earlier on, we got this elevator pitch and people asked you, what is the business doing, right? And I would say that it's called Yo Buddy. It's like Amazon, but for kids' businesses, and it's to practically prepare young people for the future of work. That would be my one-liner, right? Because you've got to get that out of the gate straight away. The minute you have their attention in a pitching scenario, they want to know, what are you doing? What is it that we're talking about here? And you've got to be super clear on what you're doing and what the outcome is. So in that example, I've said, I'm developing Amazon for kids' businesses. That's the thing that I'm doing. That's the kind of rudimentary definition of what I'm doing. But what we're trying to achieve, what the mission is to practically prepare young people for the future of work, right? That's the outcome, right? And then we've got the problem to solve. So we start with cover slide. What is the business doing? What is the problem that you're going to solve? And in this instance, let me see. Okay, I can zoom in. Great. So again, in this instance, I've said consumers and businesses want to support the next generation of business leaders, but there's no way for them to find them and buy their products and services, right? And then I've supported that by a statistic from the OECD, so that people don't think that I'm just making this stuff up, that there's some social proof, if you will, that will go behind it. Then I've supported that problem statement with some statistics, which technically that could be a filler slide. And if I was pitching in a real environment, I wouldn't necessarily use that statistics slide. Then, so we've got cover, we've got what the business does, we've got the problem we're trying to solve, and then the solution. So you said, okay, got the mission, we've got the problem, then what is the actual solution? How are you going to do this? And that's what I've done in the solution slide. Once you've done that, that first top layer should tell whoever it is you're talking about everything that everything that they need to know. It should cover all the basics. Everything else after, the next 2 rows of slides are details, are like the next layer of information that someone needs to hear. The first layer, that first row of slides, that is the context setting. That is essentially, they should then at that point sit back, and whoever's receiving that, the panel, the investor, should sit back and think, I know what this business is about. I know what problem they're solving. I know what their mission is, and I know how they are going to do it. Now I've understood that. Now I'm interested to hear a little bit more information, right? So at that point, I can then tell them a little bit about traction, because I'm asking for, in this instance, maybe, what am I asking for here? Can't even remember how much money I'm pitching for, but about 250K, 300K I'm pitching for. So it's not a pure startup necessarily. So therefore, I want to talk about traction. I want to say, look, if you're on board with what I've told you, you're probably thinking, what have I done so far? So here's some traction, right, to validate the fact that I'm not just sat on this idea, that I'm doing something about it. Now, the reason why this is important is because if you pitch an idea to a panel of investors, and we'll just use this use case at the moment, they will think to themselves, what have you done? What have you practically done to prove, test, prototype, roadmap this idea? Because you can do something. There's something that you can do. You can draw up a wireframe. You can create a logo. You can speak to some customers. You can do something in the real world that takes it off the page. And because essentially the reason why this is important is because for decades, investors have put money into what looks like a good idea, but it didn't take off. And it didn't take off because it was never tested in any format with the market that it's trying to approach, right? So even though you're raising money to do the business, there are things that you can do. It could be a survey, it could on Instagram, it could be, you know, conversations, it could be some kind of research. There is something that you can do to demonstrate traction. And if you do this, it will separate you from 3/4, if not more, of whomever else is pitching against you, right? Okay, I'll move on. I think I've labeled that one. Then they'll want to know, okay, so what is the business model? Meaning, are you developing a product? Is it, you know, something that we can touch and feel? Is it a service? Is it a book? Is it an information-based product? Is it a TV show, a podcast? Because there's a lot of ways that I could solve the problem of preparing young people for the future of work. There's loads of ways I could square that circle. But how am I actually doing it? What is the business model? And when they say business model, that term is akin to revenue model, right? So they're saying the business of it is a product. In this instance, it's a digital product. And we're going to be making money, right? In these ways. So how is the business going to work, right? And then once they've got all of that, they're going to be thinking, well, you know, unless you really are a genius, which perhaps some of you here are, then there's a good chance that somebody might be doing something closely related to you out there. Never say to an investor, we have no competition. Never say that, right? Now, I know some of my entrepreneur friends might argue with me on this. Hopefully, most of them won't. But if you say to an investor or someone you're pitching to, we have no competition, it will just sound naive, right? Because it's a little bit like saying, if you're a banana and you're in a bowl of fruit, you'll say, I have no competition because there's apples, pears, and oranges, right? And they're not like me. But you do have competition because you're still a fruit, right? And you're still competing for the eating time of that individual. So even though there isn't another banana, there isn't another yellow edible in that bowl, there are other food types which are within your category, and you're still competing with the person who is looking in that fruit bowl about to pick out a piece of fruit, right? So competition isn't just about if somebody's doing something exactly the same as you. It could be about competing with the share of wallet, meaning if you know that someone in the household is going to buy something, they don't have an unlimited amount of money. They might have £100 a week to spend on the types of thing that you're, let's say it's healthcare or it's fitness, right? So we know that people might spend £50 a month on their fitness, £20 a month on their fitness. That is the share of wallet. So if if there's a gym who's charging them £25 a month, and then you've got an online PT business, right? And you're saying, well, there's no competition because the gym doesn't do online PT, right? But you're still competing with the wallet. You're still competing with what that gym is charging, right? So I hope that made sense. So in that way, you can broaden the competition and it will sound like you're closer to what will happen in the real world, right? Okay, cool. Seller acquisition essentially just means how will you acquire, how will I get people to buy stuff? We've got forecast, we've got team, we've got funding, how much money am I asking for? What am I going to give you for that? Then we've got a summary, and then we've got the closing slide. Right now, I should be able to pitch that really well in about 3 minutes, pretty much, right? So we've got how many slides there? We've got 14 slides minus the front and the cover, 12 slides. So really, I should be able to pitch that in 3 minutes, right? And the previous business, the one that was the chat bot, I did that very, very similar format. I had 3 minutes to pitch, and we successfully raised some money off the back of it, right? So this is just to give you an example of the types of slides, what they look like, and as you can see, there's more visual. There's a lot of visuals. Where there is text, the text is big or it's broken up. There is a design aesthetic to it. It's not overly designed, but there is some thinking that has gone behind something like this. So that's just to give you an idea of what a pitch deck might look like over some time. Thank you, Rob. Let's move on to the next slide. So I was faced with a with an interesting situation. It was, what are we now, March? Yeah, it was pretty much this time last year. Well, actually, it was the beginning of last year, and I was asked to enter a competition, and it was for Virgin Unite, who I'd never heard of before, but they are the kind of charity arm to Virgin. Richard Branson's daughter runs it, and they were running a competition for minority-led founders in the UK and blah, blah, blah. And I was asked, look, someone sent me a link and said, you should really enter this. And I said, look, I haven't got time. I'm not going to enter it. I promised myself this year, I'm not going to enter any more awards. You know, it takes up a lot of time, blah, 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 right? And they pushed back and they said, no, Julian, I think you should really enter this. And on that person say so, because I really respected them, I thought, you know what, let me do it. So anyway, I put together a submission, and you know, it wasn't my best submission, but out of hundreds of businesses, I was shortlisted down to the last 3, and I thought, okay, fine, you know, that's great. You know, I was pleased with that, and then I was told that I need to go and pitch, right? So I thought, okay, it'd be an online pitch. I've done that before. That's fine. And then I was told, no. They're running this at the Africa Centre, and you're going to have to go there and you're going to have to pitch. And I thought, first of all, well, who does that anymore? I thought we're all doing stuff online, right? This is going to take a whole chunk of time out of my day. And then they said, not only do you have to pitch, but we're going to give you a pitch coach, right? So I thought, a pitch coach? I mean, I've been pitching for like 15, 20 years. I don't need a pitch coach, right? But then I thought, you know what, Julian, put your ego away, put your white belt on, which is like a martial art analogy, to say, empty your head of what you know, don't assume you're an expert, there's always something you can learn. And I went into this exercise with the pitch coach myself and the 2 other organizations who were pitching against me. And actually, when I found out who the other 2 organizations were who I was pitching against, I thought, there's no way I'm going to beat them, because I had a lot of respect for what they did. They did some amazing work, and I just thought, I looked at it, and, you know, with all of the, you know, with everything that I've got to who I am, even I was defeated when I saw who I was competing against, right? Anyway, so this pitch coach took 5 hours of my life to prepare me for this pitch. And actually, I learned some stuff from them. I really did. I learned some stuff. And on the day, as the story goes, on the day of the pitch, we won. We won the award. We won the pitch, and that's me. Well, that's me in the middle. That's Richard Branson's daughter to my right, and there's some of the other organizations that were pitching. So I say all of that to say that even though I think I know all about pitching, chances are, if I didn't have that pitch coach, I may not have won that pitch. And that opportunity that I've had, Richard Branson gave us a shout out on social media, loads, and it's opened up a bunch of doors and a bunch of opportunities that, you know, are just going to, you know, change things and really be beneficial to me and the organization, right? So that was because even though I thought I was really good at something, I still took the time to learn about it, right? And it made all the difference in the world. So even if you think you know it all, just like me, right, you might know someone else who knows it all. There's always something you can learn. And this is just, for me, you know, a really, that is testament to that. And it's a lesson that I wanted to share with you guys. Thanks, Rob. We can move to the next slide. So one of the things that I learned when I was delivering that pitch, and the pitch coach told me as I was delivering the different elements of my story and why we were doing what we were doing and what we wanted to do in the future, she said that it triggered, there was some emotional, that I naturally triggered her emotionally, right? Because, you know, there were some sad parts of the story, some inspirational parts of the story, blah, blah, blah. And she said, you know what, Julian, you need to major on that because you naturally have parts of your story which can tap into the human in everybody, and that will trigger people because that's what they're going to remember. They're not going to remember the facts, figures, dates. They're not going to remember all of that. You know, there's a saying that people don't remember what you do, they remember how you made them feel, right? And the same thing happens in a pitch. So with our lovely lady on the screen now, do you want to make people laugh? Do you want to make them sad? Do you want to make them confused? Do you want to, the bottom right one, I can't remember what emotion that was, but there's 4 different types of emotions, right? Which emotion do you want to trigger? Because if you don't trigger an emotion in your pitch, chances are it will be forgettable. I'll say that one more time. If you do not trigger some kind of emotion in your pitch, chances are it will be forgettable. Now, it's not that you're going to make them laugh through all 7 to 10 of your slides. No. It's not that every slide has to invoke some kind of emotion. No. But the overall sense, people need to be left with something. Because as human beings, we make decisions in a number of different ways. And even though a business pitch might seem like a mechanical thing, humans are still humans, and people will remember how you made them feel in the pitch. They will feel the passion and emotion that you might have for what it is you do. And that's the thing that will separate you, because you have to remember, you're pitching probably against other people, right? So you're competing for a share of funds or opportunities or resources that are available. And you've got to think of how can you separate yourself from everyone else, right? And I suspect there's a great chance that there is something that you are passionate about that you can really major on. There are elements of your story that might make people laugh, that might make people cry, that might make people, you know, that might inspire people, whatever it might be. Pull out and underline, highlight what those are and major on them. And practically what that looks like is what I'm doing now. I'm saying some things really, really quickly, and then I'm stopping and I'm pausing so that you can look at the woman on the screen and take in some of that emotion. And often this is done through pace. It's what they call pace. If you want to deliver something that's really inspirational, you might raise your voice and raise your hands. If you want to trigger something that is really emotional and really sad, you might slow down how you're delivering that part of your pitch, and you might change your pace, because that causes people to listen a little bit more to what you're saying, and it might make it a bit more memorable. So one of those things, none of it's rocket science. It's all stuff that can be practiced and learned, but it's a very useful device. And if you do it, chances are most of the other people pitching against you won't be doing it, right? So again, trigger some kind of emotion, and practically you will do that by changing pace, changing pitch, tone. And I'm not saying do this mechanically, right? I'm saying that they will, I'm sure there will be genuine reasons for you to do this, right? All you're actually doing is doing it more intentionally, right? And using some of these tools to kind of pull them out. Thank you, Rob. Next slide. So again, and I know I've said it before, but increasingly in pitching environments, you know, you won't have all the time to give the big dog pitch. Sometimes you need to give the little puppy pitch just so you can get things over the line, right? You know, I think I've labored that point enough, but it is worth repeating, because 9 times out of 10, when I'm approached by an entrepreneur and they say, Julian, I'd like to tell you about my business and idea, and I say, I'm all ears. Before they start telling me about their idea, I say to them, tell me your idea in 1 sentence. And 99% of the time, when I ask them to do it in that way, they're stumped. They can't. They have to then think. And I allow them the time. I say, look, that's probably the first time you've been asked that question. But if you can do that, it means that it will be useful to you in any pitching environment, right? So sometimes they'll have to sit down and think about it for a minute. And I say, look, just take a minute to think, and then tell me your business idea in 1 sentence. The reason why that's difficult for us is because we want to tell you so much about the idea. We want to tell you about the moment we realized the idea when we were in the playground at 7 years old. We want to tell you about the big Goliath, the bad business that we want to defeat. We want to tell you about the dream we had and the colors of the logo and how much bigger it's going to be than Facebook. We want to tell you all those things, right? But number 1, most people don't care. And number 2, they're not going to remember. Number 3, they haven't got time. They just want to know can you tell me very succinctly about your business? So be able to do that in one sentence. Really practice that. Honestly, if you do this, it will be so useful to you. And remember, second and third to that is you have told them what the business idea is in one sentence. Then they'll ask you, what problem are you trying to solve? Give that in one sentence. Then they may ask you, who are you trying to sell to? You know, who's the audience for this? And again, throughout all of the pitch, all of those slides in the deck, try and deliver those things. Have a one-line version of it. Have a 10-page Wikipedia version of it too, if you really want. And at some point that might come in useful when you're about to really do the due diligence of this. But to start with, have a really small puppy version of what you're trying to deliver and leave the big dog version until you really, really need it. Thanks, Rob. We'll move on. So in summary, remember, there are different types of pitch. Remember, we talked about the elevator pitch. We talked about, you know, the pitch that you might make to investors. You've also got to make that pitch hit. So just like our pitch of throwing the ball, you've got to make it intentional. You've got to have focus, and you've got to put some practice behind it. Number 3, don't use complicated terms. We don't want it to look like an algebra equation, even if you're good at algebra. It's got to be done in a way that a 10-year-old can understand. Number 4, do not use 100 slides. You're not going to have time to be able to do that. If you're in a pitching environment, chances are that panel's got to see 5, 10, 15, 20 pitches. There's a reason for that, but it also forces you to really get the message across in a short but impactful way. I gave you some of the common slides that you could use. So we had an intro slide, we had mission, we had the problem you're going to solve, we had some statistics to back it up, we had the solution, we had traction, we had competition, business model, we had forecast team, and then we had how much money you're gonna raise, and then a closing slide, right? Just like me with the Virgin Unite opportunity, do practice. It could be the difference between an opportunity and an opportunity, right? Again, even for me, seasoned in doing this, that made all the difference on that day for me. Do trigger some kind of emotion. It is in there somewhere in you, in your idea. Bring it out, because it will really help to set you aside from the other businesses or ideas that are being pitched. And lastly, do keep it concise, because really, if you are on a panel, you're receiving 5 or 10 presentations, you're not going to remember everything, right? The ideas which you can remember in a sentence or two are probably the ideas that you're going to be able to process more effectively. And it'll give you pitching the best chance of success. So that's it. I think we've got one slide just for Q&A, but thank you all for listening. Hopefully we can collect some questions and I can hopefully answer some of them.
Yeah, thanks so much, Julian. Yeah, thank you very much, Julian. That was awesome. I don't know if
Thank you, Rob.
I don't know if you could see me just nodding the whole time.
Okay.
I've been running the entrepreneurship competition here for 6 years now, and I've seen all manner of pitches. I've seen amazing pitches. I've seen, you know, awkward pitches. I've seen pitches that are way too long, pitches that don't actually cover the information.
Right.
So what you've just described very succinctly in your sum up is exactly what we're looking for as a judges panel. I just wanted to kind of contextualize some of the stuff that you presented on in context of the Open Business Creators Fund. So students here are entering one of 3 different categories. So those who are curious, and maybe they just have an idea, or it's an idea they put a bit of work into. That's for £1,000, a grant of £1,000. Then we have people who are serious with their business idea, and that's people who maybe they've registered a business, they've been running a social enterprise or a business for a short while, and they need that next little injection of cash to really grow. And then finally, we have the committed category. And these people are running an existing business and they're looking for their first decent investment. And we're giving them a grant of £10,000. So to all of you listening, when we're thinking about pitching, in the curious category, we don't ask for a pitch. You can kind of think about your Validate portfolio as your pitch on a paper. The different building blocks of the business model canvas that you go through and Validate kind of mirror those different points that Julian was talking about. You're thinking about what problem are you solving for customers? That's your value proposition. You're thinking about who are you solving the problem for? That's your different customer segments. And I would encourage you to use the summary part of the Validate portfolio to explain your project in one sentence, explain what problem you're trying to solve in one sentence, so that the people evaluating it kind of get that straight off. For the people who are entering the serious and the committed categories, we do ask for a 2 to 3 minute video pitch as part of your application. And we'd love to see you follow exactly what Julian's laid out here. And I think it's super valuable that you have shared your pitch deck for YoBuddy. I really thought it was important to see traction. This is something that I so often see people leave out. And it doesn't have to be called traction. It can be called market research. In the competition, we don't evaluate which tests people have done, but Validate does have a section for tests, and it's great to talk about what market research you've done. So that is definitely important. And don't say we have no competition. I loved the banana analogy there. That was great. And then trigger an emotion. This is so important. When we're thinking about OU students, in my opinion, all OU students have amazing stories, and our judges panel like to hear the stories from OU students. So don't be afraid to talk about why you are the right person to be running this business, why you are the right person to be chosen to receive grant funding. Maybe think about why your life experiences or your OU study has led you to this business idea. I think those are valuable ways to trigger emotion, especially in our competition. That's all I'll say. Thanks, Julian. I'm just going through the chat.
Rob. Sure.
And someone's asked, will we share the slides after? Definitely, we'll share the slides afterwards. Some golden nuggets here. Some people leaving for work calls. Okay, here's a good question. From your experience, which key metrics and milestones should I highlight in my pitch to effectively demonstrate the traction and potential for growth without overwhelming the audience?
Yeah, so if you are, I'll give the example of a tech product, and you can maybe use this to think about other sectors. So if you have an app, for example, or a website that is the business, then often people would think about, how much traffic or downloads you had. Then they realized that people might download it but not actually sign up. So then it was, okay, how many signups did you have, right? How many people have signed up to your app or your website? Then they realized that you might sign up but not actually use it. So then it was active users. So how many active users do you have? And then people realized that people could be active, but how active are they, right? And so how much usage time is spent on your app? And a lot of this came from Facebook, because one of the things that Facebook did, which was different to apps of its time, was people spent a lot of time on Facebook every day, which was one of the, if you think back to when Facebook launched, there were very few apps that did that, or very few websites that did that. Perhaps it was only YouTube was the other one, right? Where you would be on there frequently for long periods of time. So these new metrics started to emerge. So I think it's, so, but what this points to is your revenue model. So for someone like Facebook or many apps or digital products, because a lot of them monetize through data and selling of ads and stuff like that, the amount of usage and how long it's being used are meaningful to the revenue model, right? So if you're selling advertising and you're selling data, then absolutely frequency and length of usage are extremely important. Whereas if you are a Bentley car dealership, then you only need one person to buy, you only need to sell one car a month, maybe, right? I don't run a Bentley dealership, but it's the complete opposite. They don't need people coming in every day for hours at a time. So the answer to the question is, it depends on the business model, which isn't a useful answer necessarily. But what you want to do is point the traction towards where the revenue is. So if you know you're going to be making revenue from ads, from subscriptions, from whatever it is, the traction should speak to that. Because otherwise, if you say you've got traction in an area which you can't draw a line towards the revenue model, then people might just see that as a false positive, essentially. They might say, well, it's great you've got traction here, but how is it affecting your revenue model? I'll give you a practical example. There was a time, and probably is still now, where businesses thought getting column inches, PR, being in the news and all the rest of it was amazing, until they realized that unless you set up your business in such a way that it can capture that exposure, that it will mean nothing for your business. It can mean absolutely nothing. A friend of mine, their business was on TV the other day, and he made no extra sales. Nothing happened, right? So if you use traction by saying, oh, we're in all the newspapers, we get featured on TV all the time, right? Someone who's savvy might say, but how have you turned that into revenue? And if you haven't been able to turn it into revenue, then it's not a good metric for traction, right? So think about traction insofar as, does this activity that I'm trying to generate traction from or for, does it help to influence the revenue model or the growth of the business?
Yeah, well explained. Yeah. And worth reminding everyone listening that your business doesn't have to be for profit. We're totally open to social enterprise, charity, any kind of business model. A couple more questions, some kind of for me, because Shorel's asking, the pitch model is different from your PowerPoint. I'm not sure if I'm meant to create a PowerPoint. We're totally open to whatever you want to do. You can make a PowerPoint and record a voiceover over it, telling your story. You can do an iPhone piece to camera, sat in your car, where you're telling your story. But we want you to introduce, as Julian says, these common slides, these common elements to a pitch. So we're not expecting high quality video production, just that you have taken the time to think about the format of a pitch and think about how you are explaining your business idea. Because this competition is not trying to find, the next Facebook, the next Tesla. We're really looking at how students are learning the skills of entrepreneurship and how they are applying what they've learned to explaining their business idea through the Validate portfolio and through their pitch. So, of course, we want to support impactful businesses, but we also want to ensure impact on different students. So where a student has an idea that really has promise to make an impact on themselves or their family or their local community or the country or the world, that is what we're looking for. And we're looking for you to explain that to us. Another question here from Carrie. Would you say the slide using your mission and funding can work as a business plan? I wouldn't say so. A business plan is a much more formal document, maybe that you're taking to a bank for a loan. But definitely mission and funding slides are important snapshots of what your business is all about and how it works or how it needs funding to get started. Yes, we'll make the recording available. I'll put a link on the competition website where Julian's session was advertised. I'll replace that with a link. Examples of successful pitch from last year. I can't do that for kind of data protection reasons. These are other individual students like yourselves, and we don't record their pitches, or we don't keep their pitches, I mean, to share with other people. People don't consent for us to share. But I would go, I mean, don't watch Dragon's Den as the end all be all to how to pitch, but you will see some good pitches on there. And I do kind of say to students, we're like a Dragon's Den, but a very, very friendly Dragon's Den. It's going to be experienced, knowledgeable people who are really curious about your story and your idea. But Julian might suggest some good pitches.
Yeah, good question. So there's the most famous incubator in the world, or startup accelerator in the world, is called Y Combinator. Companies like Airbnb and Dropbox came out of there. If you go onto their YouTube channel, they have lots of really great content about pitching, and they probably have some pitches from some of their batches. So I'd have a look on there, because it's not glamorized stuff. It's real nuts and bolts stuff, but they output some really high quality companies. So that will be worth a watch.
That's a good shout. So that's Y Combinator.
Yeah.
All right. Jess has asked, is there a OU webpage where we can see previous winners and look more into their businesses? Definitely. I will add some stories on previous winners to the competition site. And I'm going to send an email out to everyone participating soon. So I'll include examples of former winners. And then do we get feedback on whether we win or not? Yes. So this year, the people evaluating your portfolios are going to offer some feedback. It won't be, as much feedback as you get on a tutor marked assignment, but it will be, if you're not successful in receiving funding, it will be kind of what more you could have added to the application. And if you do receive funding, then we'll definitely have helpful tips on where you can go next. That's all we have time for today, everyone. Thanks again to Julian for coming along. I'm always available at res-student programs. I try to respond to people super quickly there. And we have another session next Tuesday at the same time, talking about developing an entrepreneurial mindset.